I'm going to talk this morning about my concerns regarding TikTok addiction in America and the types of problems that I foresee happening from it, especially in the current reality where interests close to Donald Trump have control of the app. There's also the new blog that I came across last night and video. His video will be uploaded to this blog as well so that you can hear what Mike Adams has to say. And I find that to be significant because I don't follow the guy because for years he's promoted Trump. He's worked with Alex Jones. And this is an example of somebody that sees the obvious, that at some point he made a break. However, we can psychoanalyze how deep that break actually is. Are they awake to a great deal of the lies, a great deal of the disinformation and racism that Donald Trump activated, that was already there? Were they able to see that? Were they able to wake up from the nightmare, wake up from the spell? Or did Trump just simply go too far? Because it's obvious that he's going to do what he's going to do, whether or not he's supported by that base, because he's bringing forth a dystopian agenda that's for a whole lot of people. He doesn't work for the American people. And as far as I'm concerned, neither did many previous presidents. And a lot of people today just don't get it. What they really don't get is how evil this actually is. Even the most hardcore of the Trump protest base, or people that are protesting against Trump, a lot of them don't see how evil and organized it actually is. And so he's airing his concerns about these concentration camps because that's what they really are. For now, they're being called detention centers. And what is obviously concerning to me is that, for example, you look at the facility in Hutchins, it's not set up for sewage. It's not set up for living. Okay, it's still in a warehouse condition. Many years ago, when people would warn about concentration camps in the future, and I was one of them, it was just based in common sense. I noticed even then a tendency for people to call them FEMA camps and for people to show alleged maps, of where these facilities might be. And I believe that there was always some form of disinformation that was organized on the internet to lead people astray so that credible issues, end up debunked in the eyes of the public and the media. So I never was on that bandwagon of calling them FEMA camps or demanding that they be called FEMA camps, nor was I of a belief system that they were necessarily facilities ready to go that would house or detain 1 million people at once. I thought that was actually far-fetched and wanted to see the evidence. Instead, I opted for an opinion that there would be concentration camps in the future, but that they would turn existing facilities, as in facilities and buildings that are already created, they would turn them into facilities. Okay, now if you look at what's taking place with Hutchins and other places, these are warehouses that were already created, and there's a similar design. What's creepy about that is the warehouses here that surround me, where I'm at, they look just like that. Right now, there isn't a solar storm at the moment that I'm speaking, and we're past the full moon, but the energy is bad. My diet hasn't been great either. There's been a number of ways in which I have tried to unplug. There's been days, I made it like 36 hours, where I did not look at any news content at all. I listened to, some NPR locally, KERA, and I have some things to say about some of their reports. We'll get to that later. But what I've come to find out is when you're in my shoes, it's very difficult to fully unplug, when you're affected by that news. And even just hearing Kara radio talk about the ongoing war on Muslims via Ken Paxton, calling the CAIR organization a terrorist organization, right as they build a concentration camp. outside of downtown Dallas, where there is a very high concentration of immigrants from certain places in the world, which Donald Trump happens to hate and probably wants to destroy. Okay, so I'm just using common sense here. This is not classic conspiracy theory. I still haven't seen anybody from that world or genre, including Mike Adams, talk about the vulnerability that a lot of Muslims are in, immigrants are in, and their children, even if they're American, based on where this is going. Years ago, they called it a beast system. You know, this surveillance system of robotics, the type of system that can turn on and off your, alleged futuristic microchip. Well, now we're in the era of the digital ID. Now we're in the era of all these surveillance technologies being rolled out, social credit scores. And so on lots of different levels, there should be healing between myself and aspects of society that found not only this, but a lot of things that I and others have talked about to be a joke, to be threatening. So when we talk about the reality of being in a simulation, being in the matrix, it gets pretty deep and it gets pretty personal. In fact, I'm thinking that I should be writing a blog called Doing Time with Demons. But that's just me. Just to really get it out there. So we have the reality of these detention centers going up, and there's a lot of them that are being proposed, and there is a major push forward that has taken place since January of 2026 with a lot of different things. Not just that post from DHS on social media about 100 million people being deported from America and what that might look like as they depict a beach with, ironically, a wave coming over it or coming upon it. And so these groups are being called terrorists when they're not actually involving themselves in terrorist activity on the heels of many family men here locally and around the nation being kidnapped from their wife, from their child, or their children being kidnapped from them. And then you have a lot of people acting like they are demonically possessed, getting pleasure from this. And so some people are actually being traumatized from the images. For example, NPR did a story on vicarious trauma. Okay, and they talked about how people might be experiencing vicarious trauma by seeing the 5-year-old. But what if you look like the 5-year-old when you were 5? What if the race of people being persecuted, what if you look like them? What if you passed for Hispanic? What if you passed for Afghani? What if you passed for Iraqi? What if you passed for a Palestinian? What if you passed for the people blamed for 9/11? And for 24 years, 25 years, you face that stigma for looking like a Muslim? That's a very different type of trauma. And I'm upset that the left and NPR doesn't seem to care about my story. That's what hurts. Now I'm going to say this, then just go back to this narration. Even though you see protesters out in the street, for a guy like me who's controversial, who doesn't fit in physically, it's very hard to make friends in America, in the modern America. And I'm not in Portland, Oregon anymore. Not that that was easy for me in the past, because the truth is it wasn't. Not before my show, not during my show, and not after the show. And so whatever's going on between me and the rest of the human species, me being too different, energetically, spiritually, intellectually, physically, it's not just the people of Portland, Oregon, but it's especially the people of Dallas, Texas. There's a lot of things I want to say, but when I go to the market and I see and I pick up on the fear, even from the left-leaning women, which clearly are a network, I'm not judging, of lesbians. Okay? Just because someone's lesbian, or just because someone is left-leaning in America, or just because somebody has a certain color hair, for example, or because someone goes to a protest, for example, to add that does not mean that they don't have a tendency within them to be tribal, to treat men that look like a certain way or have certain ideas or have a certain passion like a threat, or like they're part of the problem or the patriarchy. There's a lot of people out there that in the current protest movement are generalizing again. They're not looking at the big picture as to how we got here. And they're certainly not at all looking at causes and conditions such as what was done in Iraq or Afghanistan. That's the last place modern folks want to go. That's too deep for them, apparently. And then I've talked to you in the past about how even though there are a lot of, in certain areas, immigrants from certain places, typically my experience with them is an allergy, including my family. There's a real allergy that people have, especially people that are Orthodox, but also people that are atheists. They're allergic to what I'm saying too. They're not into it, and they're not supporting it, and they're not wanting to hear more of it, even if much of it is right. And they are a demographic that is, in my opinion, very directly affected by the things that I'm talking about coming about. So this hurts. I'm in a region of North America where I can't talk to the woman that brought me down here to live in her house. She saved me from a bad situation when I was being stalked and doxxed when I had my own land in Colorado. And in the beginning, she had an interest in, editing some of my writing or talking to me about some of these ideas, especially the paranormal. But the reality is people change. And people in this world that are heavily invested in their job, a certain identity that goes along with that, they're used to a certain reality, they're not living like others. She had to work very, very hard in her lifetime, right, to get to, where she's able to take care of herself, but many others have not been so fortunate, even if they were intelligent and they were able-bodied, due to poverty, due to race, due to child abuse. A lot of people didn't have the opportunities that she had. What I'm getting at, it's kind of hard to talk about this, she has no feelings whatsoever for the things that are happening to others, be they, this particular group, race, or gender. And it has been the subject of straight-up arguments like, how could you not care? And right now I'm at the point where I know that those arguments are going to go nowhere, and that I am not in control of anything. I'm a guest. And there's a lot of things that I need to talk about, that I need to air, because I'm feeling very uncomfortable, when I'm dealing with a situation where it's 2026, the things that I've talked about, a lot of them are coming to pass. And the only person that she wants me to be, the only thing that she wants out of me, in other words, is to be able to get a hug from me. Like I'm like a pet, basically. And we've had this discussion also. So, without getting into, finger pointing, and I'm accountable for where I'm not perfect, we're dealing with a communication breakdown that I'm sure even women are dealing with in their own live-in situations, whether you call it a relationship or a marriage. Basically, where you hit the wall, not literally, but metaphorically, where you can't go any further, trying to communicate with somebody about having compassion for others that are being whisked away, raped, hurt. Like, there's a real callousness to some people in this world that's frightening. It's very alarming to me to be this sensitive, and to see things coming about, and to feel trapped in a situation where my empathy for others works against me. Okay? And if we were to talk literally, for hours about some of the negative things that happened to me in the last couple of years, it all has to do with me having an activist or a protest spirit from Portland, Oregon, that has raised certain concerns about injustices in certain areas where you just don't do that. Okay? And I found that my own best friend